The plan will work, Your Majesty.
Of course it will. The Blight ends here.
Every so often, the goblin piloting my meat suit forces me to think about Dragon Age. The original Dragon Age Origins, not any of the newer ones. There was just something special about the first game, and none of the subsequent entries in the franchise ever came close to being as impactful. I figured now that the new Dragon Age Veilguard has been conjured out of the void, it'd be a good time to investigate this matter. Now, there's obvious low-hanging fruit that I can discuss ranging from gameplay to story to pacing, all of which has already been the subject of countless other videos. Instead, I'd like to talk about something that I've yet to see anyone else speak about when it comes to comparing the Dragon Age games, and that's difficulty. Difficulty is one of the key differences between Origins and Veilguard, outside of the obvious shift in making the game super fast. But I'm not here to talk entirely about higher difficulties being more satisfying for gameplay purposes. No, I wanted to talk about how difficulty that challenges the player is an integral part of the story as well. RPGs being story-driven games is by no means a new concept. Some of the best stories told in gaming have been RPGs, though often people point towards stellar writing or memorable characters as the only reason. On paper, such an explanation makes perfect sense. Good writing and characters are the story after all, are they not? In traditional media such as movies or books, that might be true, but games are unique in that those who partake take an active rather than passive role in the story. We don't simply watch the villain at the end getting bested by our heroes. We ourselves take on that role and must reach that conclusion by drudging through fights and ambushes, intrigue and betrayal, camaraderie and heartbreak, before finally putting all that we learned to the test to actually achieve an ending rather than merely observing one. To be clear, I'm not here to shame anyone for playing on an easier difficulty. Games are first and foremost made to be enjoyed, so I respect people playing the games in ways that work for them. I do, however, wish to make a case for why challenging yourself in games can serve to make the story work better. Now, I've never made a video essay before, so you'll have to forgive me for any rough edges. Just know I felt passionate enough about the subject to share my thoughts, and hopefully give those of you who haven't tried this game a chance to enjoy it for yourself. Thanks for watching, and let's get to it. We begin our journey, much like any RPG, by creating our character. One of the most impactful choices we will make here is picking our starting origin, which was a feature you could tell they were very proud of considering it's what they named this game. This mechanic allowed you to pick a starter story as opposed to a traditional background like you would in some other RPGs. You'd then get a chance to play out your origin, allowing you to get invested in your character's backstory in a more meaningful way than you would if you weren't present for it. These origins sadly aren't especially challenging, so they don't serve as a good example of the game's difficulty, yet it's still possible to struggle a little in them depending on the origin you pick. Now, I've always loved playing a mage in all RPGs, and I think Origins does spellcasting quite well. So I go with that. I make sure to pick up both a disabling spell and a heal, as both of these are very useful, and off I go. Now, mages in this game are feared, so the powers that be keep them isolated to a lonely little mage's tower in the middle of nowhere where they are watched over by the Templars, the military arm of the Chantry, the predominant religious organization of the Kingdom of Ferelden. Our first order of business is graduating from being a scrubby little apprentice to a full-fledged mage. To do that, we are tasked with entering the Fade, a metaphysical realm containing both dreamers and demons. In order to prove ourselves capable of resisting demonic corruption, we must seek out and defeat a demon ourselves. I won't cover the prologue too extensively as it's fairly easy and serves more as an introduction to basic game mechanics, though it does still serve to get us invested in our character's origin. One thing I did want to explain briefly is the game's combat system. It's real-time but gives you the option to pause, which is a feature I make liberal use of as it's helpful to plan your next moves and switch between characters. While exploring the Dream Realm, we find a former student who failed the same test we were sent to do, and without giving us any choice in the matter, he tags along. Oh yeah, and he's also a mouse too. We also meet two other notable characters while in the Fade, a Spirit of Valor who promises to give us a weapon to help us beat the demon who's trying to kill us. But first, we need to duel him and win, or he'll kill us. Then there's a Demon of Sloth who offers to teach our useless mouse friend how to transform into a bear if we can answer his riddles 3. If we fail, he'll also kill us. I'm sensing a theme here. This place sucks. Thankfully, we're a smart little fella and solve the riddles no problem. And with that, we confront our final test. A demon of rage, with a real hard-on for escaping into our plane of existence. With our combined powers, we overcome him, though in a twist of fate, our real final test was our companion all along, who morphs into something big and scary that we aren't quite able to see. Though he just sort of lets us go no problem, and we're thrust back into our world with our brand new mage's robes. Congrats. Now for this next part, I sadly lost most of my footage, though you're not really missing much, as the extent of this next section is essentially just us running errands, so in the interest of saving time, I'll cover just the important stuff. One thing of note that does happen is our friend tells us that he's engaged in a forbidden romance with one of the nun-like clergy ladies, and that they intend on removing his emotions due to some scandalous rumors of him practicing blood magic. We also meet our first Grey Warden, a dude called Duncan. He's pretty cool. Grey Wardens are a secretive military order that draws recruits from all walks of life in order to combat the Darkspawn. Little is known about the origin of the Darkspawn, as they've been around for as long as anyone can remember, yet their intent to destroy all life in major incursions known as blights is well documented. Duncan informs us that the Darkspawn are once again a threat, and he's looking for mages to help bolster the king's army. Given that we're a real bro, we help out our friend with this whole unfortunate forced lobotomy situation and recover his phylactery, which can be used to track him down should he choose to run away. Sadly for us, we're caught, and our bro did in fact lie to us about being a blood mage. He then uses blood magic to escape, which leaves us a bit fucked. Since sorry wasn't really going to cut it, Duncan interjects to save our hide and offers to conscript us for the fight against the Darkspawn, which, given the circumstances, we have no choice but to accept. With all of that out of the way, we arrive at Ostagar to face the Darkspawn threat, where we even get a chance to meet the king himself. He must not be a very busy guy. We begin by exploring around, talking to a few NPCs, most of which tell us to fuck off. Damn, this game sure is realistic. More importantly, we come face to face with our first Darkspawn. He's already dead, but we get a chance to see our future foe on display. We also meet a traumatized soldier who's clearly seen some shit, and he's been utterly mentally destroyed by whatever it is he saw the Darkspawn do. All this does a good job of creating a real sense of unease and foreboding concerning the danger that the Darkspawn pose. We even get a chance to meet our fellow trainees, who are either frightened by or at least respect the Darkspawn as a credible threat. Once we've seen all there is to see, we meet Alistair, a junior Grey Warden, and report back to Duncan. I also named my character Alistair because I forgot that that's what this guy's name was. Anyway, Duncan instructs us to venture out into the wilds to find vials of Darkspawn blood and recover old Grey Warden treaties. Immediately upon venturing out, we see a wounded soldier barely clinging onto life, further evidence that the Darkspawn are a very real threat. Even one of our companions stops the party just to get us to turn back. Their concern, given what we've experienced thus far, feels very justified, and as we're about to experience, it's a concern we'll soon share. The reason I'm mentioning all of this setup is to illustrate the fact that where this most other sorts of games, we the player wouldn't be fazed by any of this one bit. We easily brute force our way through monstrous enemies that are only scary on paper. This is where difficulty really starts to matter, as our characters ought to feel as close to our own personal emotions as possible for the most immersive experience. If the Darkspawn were something we could easily click 2 buttons to beat, there would be no suspense, no danger, and all of this foreboding in these character moments would mean nothing, because we ourselves know in our hearts that the moment the cutscene is over, we beat the threat instantly. Yet Dragon Age isn't that sort of game. While there are a few easier fights here and there where we meet small groups of scouting Darkspawn, we eventually come upon this little bridge with a single Darkspawn standing watch. It seems simple enough. We attack him, as we have with all the others. But wait a sec, he's running away. We give chase, and all of a sudden we get stuck in a bunch of traps, and boom! Just like that, dead. All of the warnings make sense. All of the fear clicks, and all of what we've been told truly sets in. If this whole trek into the wilds was an effortless little stroll, then nothing that we've seen so far would have truly mattered. Yet the reason it does is because this whole thing truly was difficult. If we didn't have the ability to save and load like you would, if this were a real adventure, then our journey would have been over long before we ever became a Grey Warden. This game sets this up so beautifully, because it did a little show and tell concerning the Darkspawn, with all that we've seen so far, and then it delivered on that promise, with just this one encounter. Suddenly, we'll need to be far more attentive towards warnings, advice, we have to actually be mindful of our surroundings, and most importantly, a story about a dangerous foe actually has a dangerous foe. By contrast, when I played Veilguard on one of the highest difficulties, the entire time I didn't feel an ounce of suspense or fear, because I knew no matter how afraid any of the other characters got or how serious they claimed the threat would be, I would simply end the cutscene and kill whatever the supposed threat would be. The start of the game opens up with a full-on demonic incursion with apocalyptic levels of chaos unfolding before our very eyes. Everyone is in a panic, and even my character is panicked, yet all I need to do to defeat any of these demons is left-click a couple times. In the game's defense, this is the very beginning of the game. They usually become more difficult later on. Yet even still narratively, this is supposed to be this huge moment. But when you can just coast through it without even really thinking, the story falls absolutely flat on itself. Once we reach Solus and try to stop the ritual that is summoning all these demons, I'm presented with a choice about who to have come with me and who to have stick around. Now here's the thing. Had this been Origins, I would have thought long and hard about who to take with me and who to leave behind. Their skills, weapons, abilities, etc. would have been an important consideration. Yet because it's easy, I get the choice of playing the game like a sandbox, where the outcome I choose is based solely on what I want, rather than what's pragmatic. Like, picture this. In this scenario, both party members would like to come with me, and it's clear that whoever I pick is going to be happy, and the person I don't pick won't be. In the real world, in a situation like this, you would have to really ponder this decision. But while narratively it's life or death, in actuality this decision simply boils down to which companion I'd like to boost my relations with. After everything falls apart, Solus informs us that we actually released 2 powerful and evil elven gods out into the world, and it's a grave threat. But by now I'm sure you understand what I'm about to say. They don't feel like a real threat because despite what the storyline and narrative tells us, in practice with how the game plays and what we've been facing so far, we don't really respect what we're being told. All of the warnings, threats, foreshadowing that made Origins so narratively compelling end up being about as effective here as pissing on a raging wildfire. fair, because ultimately the difference between the two games is that I walked around Origins with my ass clenched the whole time, wondering when the next threat was going to come around the corner and have its way with me. Yet with Veilguard, when I saw a dragon in a cutscene, I was utterly indifferent about its presence. I was waiting for the cutscene to end like I was at the DMV or something, hoping for a chance to kill it, whereas in the original game, I'd have been begging for my miserable life. Back in Origins, we finally make it through the wilds to the tower, only to find the treaties have been taken. This is where we meet Morrigan, a witch who my party seems quite terrified of, as they have quite the reputation out here. This is another great example of where a game being difficult has bearing on the storyline. You see, having faced a magical darkspawn earlier who thoroughly kicked our ass, the encounter with a potentially even more powerful magic wielder was intimidating. This influenced my responses, and I always did my best to respond respectfully and with kindness to avoid a potentially dangerous situation. While to my knowledge it's not actually possible to fight her in this exchange, it is actually possible for you to fight and kill potential companions in other situations. My very first playthrough I killed Wynn without knowing she could even have become a companion. Our first encounter with Morrigan perfectly demonstrates the influence that difficulty has on the story, as we are now forced to actually pay attention and respond in ways that are pragmatic. We look to get on people's good sides to obtain an advantage and to avoid confrontation. Our healing resources are limited. Every time we go down, we need to use an injury kit to cure debilitating injuries and healing potions, as our healing spells aren't enough on their own, thereby making needless conflict come with an actual cost. Given all of this, the narrative choices I made were made because I wanted to avoid a potentially disastrous boss fight with a powerful witch that could have left us with fewer resources and more injuries. Upon arriving with the Darkspawn blood and treaties, we are to be inducted into the Grey Wardens proper. To do so, we must each drink the notoriously corrupted Darkspawn blood, which allows us to sense their presence. Things don't exactly go smoothly with one of the trainees when they accidentally drink from Duncan's lean cup instead in OD, at which point Duncan murders the other witness and threatens us so we don't snitch. With that bit of bloodshed out of the way, we're invited to come watch the king and his right-hand man Loghain argue for a little bit. The masterful plan that they've come up with involves the king baiting the Darkspawn into charging his lines, at which point, once the beacon at the top of the tower is lit, Loghain's forces will emerge from hiding and charge the Darkspawn in the rear. However, we're not going to be taking part in the battle as you might expect. Instead, we're tasked with making sure the beacon is lit. Loghain then has an ominous moment for like a second before Duncan pulls us away and gives us a brief rundown on our mission. With all of the preparation and planning out of the way, it's finally time for the big battle to begin. With the battle underway, we make our way to the Tower of Ishal like we're supposed to, yet it turns out it's been overrun by Darkspawn. I remember this tower being especially difficult years back, and playing it through again, it's still really damn difficult. Thankfully, we do get a couple of throwaway characters to round the party out for this section, which is super helpful. The courtyard of the tower isn't too bad, but them being present even here speaks to just how many of these guys there are. It's only once we enter the tower do we truly see how thoroughly infested with Darkspawn it is. Every level of the tower that we ascend on our climb to the top is filled to the brim with enemies. When these back-to-back encounters get progressively more difficult, the further you go. The healing spell I picked up all the way at the start of the game is absolutely essential here, and I shudder to think just how painful this all would have been without it. Yet even with the healing spell being so powerful, we're still forced to use our limited stock of healing potions. I also end up having to use mana potions on our ascent to be able to keep up with healing and damage. Also, I know it's technically called lyrium in this game, I just don't care. Another thing to note is that there is a threat system in this game, and balancing threat across your party is crucial if you want to avoid your squishier backlines from getting killed. However, it's not uncommon for my main character to routinely draw a lot of aggro because I'm doing my best to keep up heals, damage, and disables going at all times. This mechanic really adds to the difficulty of the game since you actively get punished for using your essential skills and abilities, forcing you to either slow down when you can ill afford to do so, or to order your tanky characters to use their own abilities to take the pressure off of you. In the end, it can feel like a delicate dance where overextending can brutally punish, which during this tower fight it certainly did. I had to relearn how to properly balance these things, which was honestly a lot of fun for me. Even with all of that, we sometimes have party members go down, which this game punishes with injuries that debuff your characters. These injuries persist until you use injury kits, which are expensive and you likely won't have a lot of. Limited supplies help to create a real feeling of dread anytime you're forced to use them, as you never quite know how many more fights you'll need to get through, or how many more times you'll go down. By the end of the tower, we've quite literally exhausted every single injury kit and potion we've had, further highlighting just how taxing these fights can truly be. How does this relate to the idea that difficulty enhances the story, you may ask? In several ways. Firstly, a limited stock of essential items means your party isn't able to fight difficult battles forever. It forces you to stop and consider whether you actually want to fight those bandits or that villain in situations where you may have many injuries debuffing you and no healing items to help you survive. Secondly, the scarcity and importance of supplies means suddenly money is more important as well, which by extension influences your likelihood of parting with your money in situations such as bandits forcing you to pay a toll. It also works in reverse. Being offered bribes to look the other way or generous monetary compensation for ill deeds can seem a lot more tempting in a world of great scarcity. Origins being hard puts pressure on you, the player, and your character to sometimes avoid unnecessary fights by using diplomacy or bribes. It dangles promises of wealth and power by demons and corrupt lords, which you may desperately need in your quest, forcing you to compromise on your morality. Yet it's all for the greater good in the end, even if a few people have to suffer, right? Easier games and easier RPGs don't force these sorts of choices on you. You make choices that you want to make, rather than ones that you might be forced to make. Part of what makes a storyline have weight and gravity is the notion that we can't always just pick what we want to have happen. Some of the most impactful stories are the ones where we're forced to make those difficult choices. Now back in Veilguard, your companions have unlimited healing items and abilities which don't consume mana and don't ever run out, allowing you to simply beg for a heal whenever it's off cooldown. But wait, I hear you say, doesn't Origins also have healing abilities that are unlimited? Well, somewhat. In Origins, your healing spells are limited by your mana reserves and are put on cooldown on use. However, combat in Origins was much more akin to a traditional RPG, wherein you and your opponents both did damage to one another without dodge rolls, perfect parries, and other input-based damage avoidance. Veilguard's combat was more in line with other action RPGs, where you had a plethora of tools to completely avoid damage by rolling or parrying at just the right time. To make matters even easier, your companions are completely immortal in Veilguard, allowing them to continue to contribute to the fight, and more importantly, provide you with heals anytime you need it. So while Origins required you to heal every single party member from unavoidable damage, Veilguard required only your main character to get healed, and only if you happen to get hit by something through all of your dodge rolls and parries and blocks. Healing items also received a change, with your character only being able to carry a limited number of potions, but in exchange they are now found rather commonly in every level in these little green jugs. Understandably, these changes completely remove the scarcity of healing items, as now the free healing provided by your party is generally more than enough, with the potions serving only as rare emergency fallback. You no longer have to scrounge up golden ingredients in order to stockpile potions, as they could only be found in the environment, which greatly diminished the value of gold. Where before Origins made gold and rewards tempting, as these enabled you to get a much needed edge in terms of gear and potions, now with Veilguard the non-existent difficulty meant promises of gold and power no longer seemed remotely as enticing, as you frankly had absolutely no need for it. Remember, both bribes and threats work best when you, the player, are as enticed or as threatened as your character. The upper levels of the tower are even harder, forcing us to use environmental ballista to help even the odds, though they sort of weren't that effective. The number of enemies in this fight became truly overwhelming, with more coming out of adjacent rooms, and others attacking us from the back, and archers pelting away doing significant damage. Doing the best I can, I still had a couple of my party members go down, and yes, you guessed it, they now have injuries that require some of our limited supplies to remove. Fighting through further hordes, we eventually happen upon warhounds locked in a cage, which I free immediately in order to give us an edge, which in this case was monumentally helpful. Side note, but I do appreciate just how much of a difference things like that can make to a fight. The difficulty of fights can be highly variable, with this later area feeling completely trivial because of their aid. To me, it just feels somewhat realistic and grounded that the game's designers didn't arbitrarily scale the difficulty of this area up simply because you had dogs. Rather, they communicated to the player that if you create an advantage in some way, you'll be rewarded with a much easier fight. This moment taught me that going forward, obtaining some form of an advantage like extra allies from a successful dialogue won't be punished by a tougher fight like you would be in some other games. When we finally get to the top of the tower, we are greeted by our first sort of boss fight. The cutscene presents us with this gargantuan monstrosity that we have to kill before we can light the beacon. Those of you with a keen eye will recognize this as the exact same arena from the Mage origin cutscene. They just sort of recycled it for this fight. This fight saw me use a number of my utility spells such as freeze to hold him in place while we do damage and to interrupt his attacks. But most important of all was the heal. When the ogre grabs my companion, I waited for him to be hit a few times to not waste any of the heal. Had I not picked this ability, that guy would have been dead, as he had no way to drink a potion while grabbed, and the ogre does enough damage with that move to kill any of us from full health. The rest of the fight I spent kiting the boss, healing where I can, and applying all the stunts we have. Despite none of us going down, this fight could have gone a lot worse. Had we not picked up and used that heal, we would have lost one of our guys. While things worked out, this fight was actually a fair bit more challenging than it actually appeared at first glance. When I first played this, in fact many of the times I played this, I actually lost to this ogre at least a couple times, and I know other people did too. Now that our task is done, we are rewarded with some more cutscenes in which we see that sketchy evil-looking dude with a propensity to monologue to himself just out of sight of other characters was evil all along. I was as shocked as you guys. He orders his soldiers to retreat instead of doing the flank attack that he promised, resulting in the forces holding the pass to get overwhelmed. We see both Duncan and the king get absolutely bodied by the same type of ogre we just fought. This, by the way, I feel was absolutely intentional on the developers' part. They just had us fight and likely struggle against this exact enemy. And believe me, I know many people who did, and even checked online to see what other people thought. A surprisingly large number of people had issues on this fight. Well, maybe not surprisingly, actually. Because we know from first-hand experience how difficult this enemy is, it's not unexpected then that it's an ogre that lands the killing blow on both Duncan and the king. This form of hands-on storytelling serves to make us, the player, feel so much better about our accomplishments. The difficult ogre fight felt like a true challenge, and its difficulty is validated through the story when we see a veteran Grey Warden and the king himself fall at the hands of one of those things. Had the fight been easy, we would have approached the subsequent cutscene quite differently, wondering instead how the two would die to such an easy enemy. Yet because it's common to struggle against the ogre for both our party and the one on the field, it further serves to show the player that the narrative and the gameplay are tightly interwoven. The narration is therefore reliable, teaching us that what we experience, hear about, and witness through both the story and the gameplay are one and the same. Let's pop back into Veilguard for a little and see how a similar fight goes. In Veilguard, we are on the hunt for some magical artifacts of great importance, so we explore an ancient ruined elven city. At first, we fight our fair share of demons, which was, as to be expected, quite easy, but later on we meet our very first Darkspawn in Veilguard. The cutscene introduces them in a way that would make you think they're hot shit, and one of our companions even seems quite taken aback by their presence, yet when we fight them, they turn out to be the fucking easiest thing we've ever fought up to that point. In the original game, they were rightly feared, with one of our very first encounters with them resulting in our swift death, yet when we face the exact same foe here, they seem to be like a big joke instead. Also, quick little unrelated thing, but I wasn't terribly fond of their redesigned look in the game, but I'm sure to some they look fine. Now, a few little puzzles and simple fights later, and we come to the most important part of comparison. That's right, we get to fight an ogre, just like we did in the first game. Just as before, this formidable creature gets his own little introduction. The large health bar at the top tells us that this fella is a boss, and we are playing on the hardest difficulty, so this ought to be difficult. I spoke earlier about some of the key gameplay differences between Origins and Veilguards. Every single one of them is on display here for us to compare the two games. First and foremost, our companions are unkillable. Where before we had to split aggro and heal our party members, we can now completely ignore their well-being. Since their heals don't cost any mana, being based only on cooldowns, these immortal healers are just able to heal us to full health whenever we take damage. If that isn't enough, we also have dodge rolls and blocks, allowing us to completely negate damage if we time it just right. And look, I'm gonna be honest, I'm not the best at RPGs, I'm okay and can be decent with some practice, but even though we took several hits, the fight itself was trivial, because you're given so many tools and resources to survive that it literally doesn't matter. After we kill the ogre, I didn't feel accomplished. I didn't feel like a hero overcoming a challenging foe to save the day, but in Origins facing the exact same foe I did. This ogre boss fight present in both games essentially mirror one another, yet only one of them had actual gravity to it. The ogre fight in Origins isn't just a test of skill. It's a narrative device. By forcing us to struggle against this towering monstrosity, the game ensures that when we see Duncan and the King fall to the same foe, their death feels earned and impactful. This is the power of difficulty in storytelling. It transforms abstract threats into tangible challenges, making the stakes feel real. In Veilguard, the ogre fight lacks this weight because the game's mechanics remove the struggle. Without that struggle, the story loses its emotional resonance, and that's the heart of the issue. When a game is too easy, it doesn't just fail to challenge us, it fails to make us care.
These two must unite for Eldon against the Darkspawn. They need you, Morrigan. Without you, they will surely fail, and all will perish under the Blight. Even I.
Ever since I was little, I've loved engrossing myself in stories. The colorful characters, the intricate worlds, the twists and turns. Gaming came and turned storytelling on its head for me. It put you center stage in these epic sagas. You weren't just reading a book or watching a movie about a valiant knight, you were placed in his shoes and expected to succeed. I think that's why a game like Dragon Age Origins sat with me all these years, and while Veilguard fun as it can be, never occupied that same special place. The hero's journey is what it is because it's arduous. Over the course of the story, we learn and grow alongside our character because we have to. Veilguard had fun combat, sure, but it robbed us of struggle and therefore growth. It told us a story about fighting demons and evil elven gods, but when we got to them, they were made out of cardboard. Origins being hard made the story feel more real. It brought to life all those monsters, turning them into something that we would absolutely dread to face but feel accomplished in overcoming. I think ultimately that's why difficulty makes a story better. We're forced to climb a veritable mountain on our quest. Anything shy of that would simply feel unsatisfying. For interactive media, difficulty is just another tool used to enhance what's already there. Good stories can show and tell, but the best ones make you experience it. Thanks a lot for watching. It truly means a lot to me if you've watched all the way to the end. I plan on making more of these in the future, and it would mean a lot to me if any of you guys would just leave comments down below letting me know what you liked and what you thought I could improve on. Anyway, thanks again, and I'll see you next time.